Hi, I'm Claudia Jurmain, Director of Special Projects and Publications here at Rancho Los Alamitos.
I'm Bill Wells. I'm the designer, interpretive designer on this project.
What were some of the unique challenges that you faced in developing the design for the new facility?
Well, over the years that this project unfolded, mostly it had to do with trying to figure out how to tell the story of this ranch within the context of the physical ranch itself. We started out with a very broad idea of sort of conventional exhibits, a lot of interpretive materials spread out all over the site. Seemed like the natural thing to do, and luckily we had some time to think about it, and we realized that it was better not to do those things. And we learned just to leave the site alone and let it speak for itself. The exhibit components pretty much went away, and so the problem was, how do we tell the story without essentially a room to tell them in? And what I was left with essentially was walls and floors. So we began to figure out how could we bring some story to these rooms using what we had to work with. And we had quite a bit of content, quite a lot of stories to tell. So in the case of one room, we had hundreds of stories to tell, hundreds and hundreds of photographs to get into this room. And the two of us had to work this out over many, many years to try to boil it down to something that allowed the occupants of the ranch to speak their own stories and still get it all into this room. And it took quite a bit of problem solving. Same thing with the larger room. How do we get some images on the floor and the wall? The floor was just an idea. We never really thought how we were going to do it. We just knew it could be done somehow. And as the years passed, we finally arrived at the floor and said, okay, how are we going to get this done? And luckily, we were able to find people who could do this and did a beautiful job of it.
Well, explain what the floor is.
We had this idea, and I actually think Pamela came up with this in a conversation, to lay out the original land grant boundaries on the floor, to explain the broad use of the landscape over time, not only historically when the land grant was granted, but modern day, so the user could compare the scope of the users in the landscape. So that was the idea, and we originally were going to have Dugald Sturmer, an illustrator, do the map himself, because he is, I think, famous for his beautiful watercolor maps. And that's why I brought Dugald into the project, was to do the map. I had another guy to do the walls, but I brought Dugald's stuff down, and he completely commanded his stuff, just took over the room. And pretty soon, nobody else was in contention, and he was going to do the wall and the floor, and we began to refer to it as the Dugald Sturmer room. As time worked through, and we got his art done for the walls, we realized that it wasn't really a smart idea to try to replicate a watercolor on the floor using a third party to paint it. So we decided to make it different. So we were able to find some guys who were basically scenic artists to come in and take my design and put it on the floor full scale, 25-foot square, which was, as Claudia will attest, it was kind of a miracle that occurred over 2-3 weeks to watch these guys do it, because we'd never done this before. And we had to basically play with the maple floor, the images, the tones, the tints, the translucencies, to get this thing to work in the whole context of the room itself. So it was a lot of fun, actually.
There are a couple of experiments going on in there. One, as Bill suggested, is that many of those things in there have never been done before. The idea that you could do an exhibition that was not didactic, meaning you won't see a lot of copy in that exhibition. It's not artifact based. The whole exhibition has to be an environment that captures the attention. From my perspective, the real challenge or experiment was, could you tell the story just using primary sources? That's not a given. That was the whole 12-year process of looking at those stories and see whether the spread from the ledgers to the diaries could actually communicate enough to the public that they would get a sense of the people who were here, the heartaches, the traumas, the pure exhilaration of the place. And the answer, after many times of looking at it, was yes. And then the question is, well, how do you do that? And that's where Bill's brilliance in terms of laying it out and seeing the space in relation to each other. Knowing that you could have this kind of an experience here that's countered by another kind of an experience here. And so the exhibition became layered, just like the landscape is layered, with different areas offer different kinds of experiences. That's all part of idea, space, and form as one element.
Yeah, we didn't really want to have one exhibit space. In other words, we didn't want one vocabulary to really be consistent and dominant, even though we wanted them to be linked. So we had basically 4 different experience spaces, and it turned out each one is a different method of presentation, really, and going from film all the way to watercolor original art, blown up huge on the walls. So that was the challenge, to try to make the experience rich enough and still tie it together, but take various aspects of the story and dedicate them to different spaces and treat them in different ways, and try not to be a traditional didactic experience. The large Rancho room has very little copy in it. It's really more the images are speaking to you in that room. The other room has a lot of copy in it, but it's the voices of the people. It's not an interpretive idea of the history. It's actually people telling in letters and oral histories how life was for them here. And there's bits of the ledger showing exactly how much money was spent in a given month back when this place was being run as a ranch. So it's very unique in that way. And the film is unique in the fact that it's also the voices of the people speaking. And I think the mix is very interesting, very certainly un-museum-like.
Unconventional. Sure. It flies against all the conventions of many museums and institutions, very much like this site does. There's nothing conventional about this site. There is no beginning and end. It doesn't have that mega one idea. It has all the ideas of California within it. And therefore it's unique, and we needed to create an environment that was also unique.
Yeah, and I think the unique thing, the wonderful thing is you can be standing in one of these rooms, like the Rancho room, and then you just walk out the door, and there's the artifact. It's sort of taking an exhibition and turning it inside out, and it really works that way, I think, very well. And particularly because the artifacts don't look like artifacts. They don't have labels on them. They're just exactly the way they were, and you can just wander around and imagine you're back in 1920 or 1860, and that's what's really nice. So we try to do it with a soft hand, basically. So.
And create a place where you want to be. If anything, Rancho Los Alamitos is a place to be, and you're going to find it on your own terms. And that exhibition, I hope, allows you to do that also. It is airy, it is thoughtful, it's compelling, and hopefully it stands the test of time, just like Rancho Los Alamitos has.
Yeah, that's a trick. It's too easy to do an interpretive treatment that looks dated really quickly. You got to be really careful about that, because this place is a permanent place, and this is a permanent exhibition here. So, I tried really carefully not to make any style come forward that would look, oh, that's so 2012. And that's really easy to do. So you got to really be cautious about that. And I think, for the most part, the images and the words are prominent, and the style is not. So that was the goal.
Great. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
All right.